In his public statements and on Twitter, President Trump frequently claims the mainstream media reports fake news and brands them an enemy of the people. Last week, the Boston Globe editorial board published a piece with the headline, "Journalists are not the enemy." It aimed to show the American people that a free press is a pillar of our democracy. The publication called on other news outlets around the country to join their efforts to support journalism. So far, more than 400 have responded. Boston Globe editorial board member and deputy ideas editor Alex Kingsbury is here with me now. Alex, thanks so much for joining us.
Sure, happy to be here.
So take us inside the Boston Globe editorial process here, and what actually led to the publication of this piece?
Sure. What prompted us to act was the alarming turn in Donald Trump's rhetoric. Listen, criticizing the press has been part of his brand since he decided to run for the presidency. No qualms against that. Criticizing the press is totally fair game. The idea that the press is the enemy of the people is something that deeply alarmed the members of the Globe editorial board. And what we did was reach out to all these newspapers around the country who are doing this important work on a daily basis and see what they had to say about that. And again, most journalists in the United States don't work for CBS News. They don't work for the Globe editorial board, institutions with a lot of resources. These are people in small towns and communities covering school boards, covering the local mayor's office. They're doing important work. They're very small organizations, and to be labeled a domestic threat was deeply alarming to us and to them as well.
So in the piece, you point to an Ipsos poll that shows that 48% of Republicans agree that news media is the enemy of the people, and 29% overall agree with that statement. So to what do you attribute that feeling to at this moment in time?
Sure, exactly. And this isn't one single poll. There have been numerous polls that show, 51% of Republicans agree with the president's sentiments. These words have consequences. The president isn't just spouting rhetoric. The rhetoric has consequences. And, again, it's sort of one thing for major news organizations to deal with that sort of blowback, which we're totally capable of doing. It's another thing for these community organizations and community newspapers to deal with that. And it looks much different if you're, one of three people on staff in Des Moines, Iowa, and you're having to cover, these local issues. It's really important for a democracy for people to be informed. That's a role of journalism, and it's something that Donald Trump is really undercutting.
I often think that the term media is widely misunderstood because, as you just point out, there is such diversity when you talk about a national news organization or a local community-based newspaper and the resources and the staffing that's available. But do you think that overall there are steps that members of the media need to be taking in order to try to regain that public trust?
I think one of the things that's really been illustrated with this project is the granularity, the texture of the First Amendment in this country. And it is vibrant. It's amazing to read through these editorials and you see, somebody in Iowa who writes in about, someone that came into their office, his editorial office, that threatened somebody with a gun. Somebody in Mississippi who's very proud that their conservative founder of the newspaper stood up to the Ku Klux Klan. Listen, these people are very intensely patriotic. They're passionate about what they do. They're committed to journalism and to the First Amendment, and they recognize that it's a vital part of the democracy, and I think that's shown in this project and really, really a good sign going forward.
So far, more than 400 news outlets have actually published pieces in support of the Boston Globe op-ed, but several newspapers, including the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, and the San Francisco Chronicle, chose not to. And specifically, the Chronicle said this in part in explaining their decision, saying, quote, "It plays into Trump's narrative that the media are aligned against him." What do you make of that response?
Frankly, that's nonsense. All the papers that didn't decide to publish with us agree with the fundamental principle and the importance of the First Amendment. Listen, for news organizations to take a stand that the First Amendment is important, should be non-controversial, and it shouldn't be newsworthy. The fact that it's both shows us a little bit about where we are today.
But I guess their argument would be that in order to take a stand, one does not necessarily need to join in a sort of direct confrontation in the way that the Boston Globe editorial board chose to actually do.
Absolutely, and totally a fair point. Listen, a lot of the news organizations that we featured in our project that are displayed on this page didn't disagree. Disagreed with us. We put their stuff up there too. Totally, a fair point and something that we like to engage in as well.
Well, in response to the piece, President Trump tweeted that the decision made by the editorial boards of other papers to call out the president was an act of collusion and was carried out as part of a political agenda. What's your response to that criticism?
I mean, collusion is something that's done in secret. I don't know, maybe in Trump Tower or wherever you're going to collude in secret. This was totally transparent. We made it a point of making it absolutely open to the press before we did it, as we did it, and afterwards as well. So,
you know, one last question before I let you go, Alex. I'm curious, is there a metric of success here about whether or not you think taking this stand and having this be such a direct position that is explicitly spelled out by the Boston Globe editorial board, whether or not that actually then permeates to the people who are reading the newspapers? Is there a way to tell?
Yeah, it's a great question. Listen, the Globe didn't write an editorial and then force everyone to run the same thing. We asked people to speak in their own words about the importance of the work that they do, and they did so. And to be honest, the patriotism and the vibrancy and the passion that came through is reward enough.
All right, Alex Kingsbury, thanks so much for your time, Alex. Really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.